I launched myself on this campaign of bad-mouthing every actor in Hollywood in order to get this part. When I knew that he was an everyman, when I knew that he was a family man and that he was not an insider but an outsider going through this experience, I really began this effort. And I would walk by Stephen's office and say things like, Al Pacino has no sense of humor, or Jack Nicholson's crazy, or whatever I had to say. I didn't care.
I pretty much confided in him of the other actors I was talking to, and he told me they're either going to say no or they're wrong for the part.
And on the day that I said to him, you need a child, that's what you need for this part, he looked up and he said, you got the part. And he knew that he did need someone who could be a child and yet a man. And I think that's really what persuaded him.
But Richard was great for the part because Richard is every person. You know, if I wanted to put myself in one of my own movies, I sort of go to Richard. You know, I felt that I was the ichthyologist in Jaws, and Richard played me in that. And I felt that I was Neary in Close Encounters, and Richard played me in that. And I also felt that I was the character in Always, and Richard played me in that also. I'm not saying that I'm the actor trying to throw myself in these roles, but when I identify with a character, I'd like to find someone that thinks like me and jokes around like me. And Richard and I have been such good friends for so many years, and we are in such agreement on so many things about just life and politics and you know, and raising families and things like this. And I mean, to me, it's an honor that he steps into roles that I identify closer to than other parts. I don't cast him in, right? I perhaps don't identify with that role as much.
The biggest reason, aside from wanting to work with Stephen again, was that I felt, as did everybody, we all felt that this particular project had a noble agenda. This was a big idea that Stephen was talking about. It wasn't just a sci-fi movie, and it wasn't just about monsters from the id, and it wasn't this. It was that we are not only not alone, but that we have relatively little to fear. People don't realize, or it's hard for people to remember, that Close Encounters was truly the first cultural, iconic moment that said, calm down, we're okay, they can be our friends. That really was a huge statement, and I, along with lots of other people, wanted to participate in it.
So that your face looks all even one color.
Makes my face look yellow. What does this remind you of, honey?
All right, then we'll just tell everybody that you fell asleep under the sun lamp on your right side.
I was living in New York at the time, and I had a lot of commercials on television. And I'd also done Young Frankenstein and The Conversation, but I also had all these commercials that were on all the time. And I think Stephen had seen me in a coffee commercial, and he said, that's the woman I want to play the wife.
And then just based on that coffee commercial said, my God, there's an typical American suburban housewife. Let me put her in my movie. I had no idea that she was such a gifted actress and comedian. I had no idea. I just liked her in the commercial. She was full of these little quirky moments, you know, in 30 seconds to sell coffee and also distinguish yourself as a complete personality and as your own personality. I thought that was amazing what she did with such economy, and I asked her to do the movie because of that.
And when I read the script, I said, you know, I love the script very much, and of course I want to play the other part. It's a much better part. He said, no, I want you to play the wife. I said, no. I mean, where I got this arrogance, I have no idea. So I said, well, you just think about it, Stephen, because I think I'd be much better. Wait a minute, Stephen, I've got an idea. Let me play both parts. I think I actually said that to him at one point, too.
All right, everybody to bed.
I had so many girlfriends at the time and relatives in my family that were married to men, and then they just lived their life through them, and they had a bunch of kids, and they ran the house, and they did all that stuff. I thought, well, I know who this woman is, and I can relate to it, and I'd like to try it. And I was attracted to work with Steven Spielberg just because he was such a great filmmaker, and I knew this was going to be a big movie. I wrote so many things about this character, and what she did, and where she did all day, and what she thought of the neighbors, and what she wore, and what kind of shoes she wore. I just went nuts on Ronnie Neary. And then, you know, none of it's on the screen, except it's there in subliminal, you know. But I did a lot of work for that part, especially when I got to Mobile, Alabama. I drove myself down to the mall, looked around, and pretended like I was shopping for furniture just to get myself into the mood of being, I mean, of course, I was this fast Hollywood actress, New York girl. I wasn't going to be doing this, so I had to get myself into it, and that's what I did. I went and tried to have the guy sell me a refrigerator. or some furniture, or a stove. Tell me what's good about this stove, and tell me what's good about this stove. And then I got to be like Ronnie Neary. That's the kind of stuff she would do, just picking apart those little details as if they were important.
Roy, what did it look like?
It was like an ice cream cone.
What flavor?
That's the kind of person that Rick Dreyfuss's character was married to. And no wonder he was seeing UFOs. She was driving him crazy.
Was it like one of those Sara Lee moon-shaped cookies? Those crescent cookies? Don't you think I'm taking this really well?
I was down to 48 hours before needing whoever played that character in the first shot, and I could not cast it. You know, like most of my movies, I offered it to 3 or 4 actresses, and they all turned me down.
He had interviewed a lot of people and auditioned a lot of people for Gillian, and couldn't find her, and I guess Hal Ashby, the director, knew that he was doing this, and he just sent over a scene from a film he was editing that we had just made.
Out of nowhere, I got a call from Hal Ashby, who said, I've just worked with a remarkable actress named Melinda Dillon, and I'd be happy to send over 2 reels of Bound for Glory in rough cut form. You can look at it and decide. And so he sent these reels over, and I saw them. And I'm talking, this is Thursday, and I'm shooting Monday. And I have not, and she works on Monday, and I have not cast this part yet. And we're thinking about turning the schedule around and pushing those scenes back, but we can't because we began shooting in Moorcroft, Wyoming, under Devil's Tower. But I wasn't desperate. I didn't cast her because I was shooting on Monday. Had she not blown me away, I would have, you know, worked all weekend to find the right person, but she was the right person.
I didn't read the script. I looked for my part in the script. I flipped through the script because I was told by my agent that it was a space movie. It was going to be spaceships, and I wasn't interested. So I looked through for my name, for her name, Gillian, and then I flipped to the back, and it said, Gillian's taking photos of the aliens. And that attracted me. And it should have clued me in that if I read anything, I was attracted to anything that I read, but I was too impatient. But that attracted me, and I decided, okay, I'll do this movie.
When I was cast for Close Encounters, I was 3 years old. We were living outside of Atlanta, Georgia, Douglasville, Georgia, small suburb, about 20 minutes west outside of the city. And I was in a preschool class. And as it happened, Sherry Rhodes, who was the casting director for Close Encounters, had a niece in my kindergarten class, or preschool class, and she came to pick up Jenny, saw me, and said, that's the kid, gotta have him for this. So I fell into it. It was pure luck. I'd never had any acting lessons, never experienced, never did any commercials. Wasn't something my parents had even really thought of. And I remember, and this is probably my first memory, I was at home playing and the telephone rang and my mother answered it. And I remember saying, not the Columbia Pictures. And of course it was Columbia. They were trying to set up the screen test.
Stephen had one whole day set aside to finally decide on the child. And it had come down to 2 little boys. It was Zach and there was Cary. And Zach was this little kid who was, I guess, 3 years old, and he had already decided it's his world. He's going to go out there and take it. And he was this rough and tumble. He wouldn't do anything Stephen said, and he wouldn't mind his mother. And I was crazy about him. I really liked Zach. And then Cary was there, and Cary was this, everyone knows who Cary is now, but he was this wondrous, quiet, soft, attentive, listening child. And he was just so amazing.
I remember I was torn between both kids because they were so good. They were equally good, and I had to make a choice. And I was just drawn to Cary. I was drawn to his... I was just something about Cary that I liked. And I gave him the part, and he was wonderful. He was just a great experience to work with.
Not a whole lot of people can say that they've been in a movie before they've ever even seen one. About halfway through Close Encounters, my parents said, hey, this kid's never seen a movie before. We kind of need to introduce him to the concept. So I saw my first films. It was a double feature of Bambi and Gus.
Is the interpreter with you?
I'm not a professional interpreter. My occupation is cartography. I'm a map maker.
I got my part in Close Encounters because I got a telephone call from a casting director who said that Steven Spielberg and Julia Phillips and Richard Dreyfuss had asked to see me to play the part of an interpreter, and I had to speak French. And they said, do you speak French? I said, I speak beautiful French. Now, of course, I hadn't spoken French since high school, and I did have a pretty good accent, but I really couldn't speak French at all. So I said to my agent, well, tell them I speak French, I'll learn or something. So I went in for this appointment, and everybody was there, and they said, well, really, basically, you're going to be an interpreter, so you're going to have to say whatever they're saying in French, you translate into English, and then you'll translate it into French for whoever plays this part. That might be Truffaut, but they didn't know that François Truffaut was doing the movie then. They hoped he would. So they said, how's your French? And I said, well, il y avait beaucoup d'années depuis que j'ai parlé français. Si vous me donnez ce boulot, ce sera très difficile pour moi. But nobody in the room spoke French, so they assumed I spoke fluent French and said, great, you have the job.
I did